Joining us now to flesh some of this out, frequent guest of the John Fredericks Show, Dr. Bradley Thayer, and from Texas. Dr. Thayer, thanks for being with us. I want to get straight to it in the time that we have, sir, and thanks for adjusting your time to be with us. Doctor, let's get straight to this because I know you've written books on it. You're very involved. The Chinese now say they're going to retaliate. Were they shocked that this president actually kicked them out of the talks and hit the switch on these tariffs?
John, I think that they were shocked at that because they've had everything going their way, as you said, for really since the 1990s. And for the first time, they're encountering with Trump a president who's pushing back against them. So I'm certain that they were shocked about it. But I'm equally certain that they are going to try to retaliate, too. And I think the retaliation is going to be in terms of agricultural products. They are going to, as you said, they're going to be hurt by that. But what they want to do, of course, is to get rid of Trump and to go back to the good old days from the Chinese perspective, where they have a U.S. president who's going to be pliable, who's going to put trade and essentially American job losses and the decline of American power first and foremost. That's what they're used to. So the retaliation, I think, is going to be strategic, and it's going to be calculated, and it's going to be in a way to hurt Trump most electorally.
So they tried to do that with the other retaliation and with soybeans and Iowa farmers during the midterms. Remember, they were targeting goods and services in key swing congressional districts, right? Remember that?
Yes. Yeah, they were.
Which was just so ridiculous. Do you see them kind of doing the same thing, Doc?
Absolutely. They want to do that because they want to get rid of Trump. At the end of the day, Trump is a president who recognizes the China threat in every respect, in trade, militarily, in diplomacy, economic, in all of it. And the Chinese want to go back again to what was a very good time for them, where they had U.S. presidents who essentially didn't pay any attention to the way the Chinese were remaking the world. So I think we should think long and hard, clearly, that the Chinese are going to do their best to try to get rid of Trump in 2020.
We're with Dr. Bradley Thayer. He's a professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio. He's also author of one of the best books out there on this, called How China Sees the World, along with his co-author. But Dr. Thayer, a leading scholar on this. So they were shocked that this president actually followed through. Now, our view of the world here with this is, remember, the president gave him like 90 days, then another 60 days. So this is what they do, right? They stall, they talk, they then renege. But I had Steve Bannon on the other. This was interesting on Monday, Doc Thayer. He said, look, that the Chinese heard that the president was unhappy with the Federal Reserve, that he was jawboning them to keep interest rates low. He was concerned about maybe the economy wasn't going to be continue to sustain a 3% growth, and so he was not going to, therefore, politically going into a second-term election risk any kind of an economic slowdown. So the Chinese then calculated and said, it's politics as usual. The president will cave. He'll claim victory on nothing, and we will continue to steal, cheat, and get our way. True or false?
I think that was what the Chinese are thinking, and that with a little bit of pushback that Trump is going to yield. But I see great determination in the Trump presidency on this issue. And the Chinese need to recognize that, and they need to recognize that with the changes that the Trump administration is acting or requesting them to implement or to act on, the Chinese could still maintain really good economic relationships with the West that still profit them, but just a little bit less, and just a little bit less egregiously in terms of the way that they're stealing from us. But I don't think the Chinese are going to do that, because the Chinese are bold and they think things are going their way. So I think we should expect that the Chinese continue to push on this, and that Trump continues to hold firm.
So what do the Chinese expect to do, Dr. Thayer? Do they think that, are they gambling that the president is going to cave? What are they gambling on?
I'm sure they're gambling on that. They think that Trump is going to be coming under enormous economic pressure. As you said, obviously you want to have a good economy as you go into the next election cycle. And anything that would upset markets or anything that would upset trade, I'm sure the Chinese are thinking that Trump is going to say, well, the election is more important than this particular trade issue. And so he's going to yield. But I think that they grossly underestimate Trump and this administration. He's not going to. And again, it's very important, I think, for all your listeners to understand that this is for the first time we have a president who's pushing back against the Chinese and is saying very rightly that the situation that the U.S. has gotten itself into cannot continue. We've got to change the way we do business. And we've got to change the way that we see China. It is the threat. It is essentially the peer competitor, the equal of us. And if we don't change our ways, we're going to be living in the world that they set for us. And that's going to be a very bad world for the United States.
Well, because they've been cheating and stealing for 50 years, and we just look the other way, like it doesn't even matter. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, they have an entire, as your book pointed out, Doctor, they have an entire bureaucracy set up to do nothing but steal intellectual secrets. I mean, they're in a college in what was it, somewhere in Texas where you live, trying to steal cancer research. Just the other day,
Anderson,
right?
Yeah, in Houston. Yeah, very important event, which is you often see this behavior with Chinese researchers that they're there to simply steal from us and to cheat from us. And you're right. This is what they expect to get away with because they've gotten away with it for so long. And that situation cannot continue if we're going to maintain our position and if we're going to maintain our economic health. So things have got to change, and this administration is bringing about that change, and they're calling attention to the China threat in every respect, and it's very important for Americans to understand that. Despite the Chinese are thinking they're going to have the fair wind and following seas, they say in the Navy, right? That everything is going to continue to go their own way, and this is just going to be a hiccup. They'll get rid of Trump; he'll be defeated in 2020. And then Joe Biden will return things to the way they used to be.
Right, which is
I think that's their
get over on us. All right, Dr. Thayer, we're with Dr. Bradley Thayer, a professor at University of Texas at San Antonio, author of How China Sees the World, and definitely shares our opinion here with what is going on with China and the tariffs. Now, the Chinese run last year, like 2017, was down a little bit, but they run basically a $350 billion trade deficit with the U.S., right? That means there's $350 billion U.S. cash going to China more than Chinese money comes in here. So the deficit is $350 billion. So they say they're going to retaliate. Well, here's the problem. We hold all the cards. We have the $350 billion they want. So what are they going to retaliate with?
Well, I think that they are a bit over a barrel, and that they will have. They need us still more than we need them in terms of trade, and that day is going to change at some point. Their internal economy is going to be large enough, and the trade networks that they're working so hard to create are going to be large enough that they're not going to need us anymore. But they still need us more. But I think the Chinese are going to be very strategic in how they retaliate, and they're going to focus their retaliation or target their retaliation in ways that will hurt Trump most for 2020. So the administration has to be prepared for that, and Americans have to be prepared for that too, in recognizing that the type of retaliation that the Chinese are going to do, despite what they say, is going to be strategic.
So I got a text question here from Amy in Fairfax, Virginia, Dr. Thayer. Amy says, please ask Dr. Thayer if the Chinese could retaliate by selling our treasuries.
They could do that. As you know, the Chinese, of course, have bought our debt and have done so for decades. But I don't think that they will do that because that would hurt their economy much more significantly than it would damage us. It would be a bad situation if they were to do that, but it would really hurt them. But it's important. Amy asked a great question. It's important to recognize that the Chinese have, and increasingly, are going to use their debt purchases as leverage against us as their economy continues to grow internally, as they get bigger internally, and their trade, essentially with other countries, continues to develop. There's going to come a day, John, where they don't need us anymore. And we have to be careful about that because that's when we would expect them to really try to hurt us, where they would try to work to replace the dollar, for example, the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. And they would try to hurt us by dumping our debt in an effort to hurt our economy. So this is a genuine threat. This is an existential threat to the United States of which we have to be aware. And Trump's efforts are really the first round in this struggle. And we should expect that this is going to continue, that their trade and the imbalances and the lack of reciprocity, the fact that there is no free trade between the United States and China, is going to continue to become an issue, and it's going to get worse, in my mind.
So, Dr. Thayer, get back to the threat of dumping our debt, right? They bought all these treasuries. They bought all this debt. Two questions. Why did they do that? And if they did dump it, walk us through what that means.
Well, they bought it because buying U.S. securities is a way to curry favor in the United States, a very important political favor with American politicians of all stripes. And secondly, because it's a safeguard that essentially a U.S. Treasury bond is the equal, the safest investment that you could make. And that was very necessary for China as they were building their economy to essentially make sure that they had good relations with the United States in the 1990s, and then when we let them into the World Trade Organization, the WTO, in 2001, and then afterwards. So it made a lot of economic sense for the Chinese to do what they're doing.
Right.
Thirdly, they want to do it, John, also because that helps American consumers, right? They want Americans to consume. Mm-hmm. And if there were any trouble with securities, U.S. Treasury, for example, interest rates are going to go up. And that means Americans are going to spend less. So it was in China, made sound strategic economic logic for the Chinese to do what they were doing. Now, were they to dump this, right? Were the U.S. government, in essence, have to repay these obligations? We would be in a difficult situation. What could we do? Well, the options, of course, would be to raise interest rates, which would generate inflation, which would be very bad for us. We could continue to essentially generate that debt and try to find other buyers for it, perhaps Gulf Sheikhdom, Saudi Arabia, etc. But it's really going to hurt us if and when that day comes. So it's a very dangerous situation that we and the Chinese, both of us, have placed ourselves in. And we need to be prepared for that and recognize that there may come a day where the Chinese, in fact, do attempt to do that to us.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, trucking the truth across America. I'm with Dr. Bradley Thayer. He's a professor at University of Texas at San Antonio and also author of many books. My favorite, How China Sees the World. So, Dr. Thayer, okay, they have the threat of the treasuries. Let's go short term. So this president's not going to cave. The Chinese aren't going to do anything because now they have to save face, which is a big deal for them. So they have to do that with their own people. But so they say we're going to retaliate, right? That's the statement they put out late last night or early today, that they were going to retaliate. And I know you said they retaliate to hurt the president politically. What does their retaliation look like, in your judgment?
In my judgment, it's going to take, there'll be several different avenues of their retaliation. Because they want to hurt the president electorally, they're going to be looking at the way that they can influence the economies of key states. So the Midwest, obviously, the Farm Belt in the United States, and perhaps a couple of other industries as well and areas are going to be targeted by the Chinese. There are going to be elements perhaps that they try to do internationally to hurt us. Efforts to do their best perhaps to increase the price of oil, although that's going to hurt them, or the price of energy more broadly, to essentially weaken the U.S. economy to some degree and encourage inflationary pressures. We've been very fortunate, obviously, because the economy has been so strong since Trump took office, that we've been in very favorable situations. But there are several avenues that they could do domestically as well as internationally to hurt us. Whether that's going to be effectual or not is another matter, right? They can try to do this. Is it going to work? I don't think it's going to work because I think the American people are going to see what the Chinese are doing, which is massive electoral intervention, right? Mm-hmm. We talk about foreign intervention in U.S. elections. Well, this is gigantic. This is titanic in terms of the intervention. I think Americans are going to see that, and they'll recognize what the Chinese are trying to do. And I think that they're going to resent that form of interference in the U.S. electoral process. So I don't think it's going to work for the Chinese, although they're going to attempt it.
Well, sure, they're going to attempt it. And, of course, the first thing they're going to attempt is to stall again. That's why they reinitiated talks in hopes that they could get another 90 or 120-day reprieve and then figure out how to gain political leverage, whether it be in the narrative or something else, because this is what they do, right? Remember, the first wave of stalls went by and they accomplished nothing. And then actually what the president said is that in all the things they had negotiated, they simply reneged on them all when the clock ran out,
right?
Which is why he said he's had enough. So it's inconceivable to me, Dr. Thayer, after all this, the Chinese would have thought they could have gotten away with that again, that the president would just roll and either give another stall or just acquiesce. Boy, they have misread Trump from day one. And I also love how the president says, my good friend, President C. Oh, yes, come to the Mar-a-Lago, we play golf. My good friend, my good buddy, my good friend, President C. Great guy. We have a great relationship. We talk all the time. I would hate to see who he's got a bad relationship with.
Right, I think so. I think Trump. I think Trump is signaling that he respects the Chinese at a fundamental level. He recognizes what the Chinese are doing. They're trying to take advantage of us, and they've gotten away with it for a really long time. So it's fool me once, shame on me; fool me twice, shame on you. Right, essentially, or that type of situation, John. He's just thinking that, Xi is trying to do what he's trying to do to benefit his country. And Trump is saying, that's not going to happen anymore. It's going to take time for the Chinese to recognize that.
You're right, spot
the
on.
old patterns, the old ways that they fooled us aren't going to work anymore.
Spot on, Doc.
But they will recognize that in time.
But you're right. I mean, it's going to take them time to recognize that, and they want the old game to still be played where they were the guaranteed winner regardless of what side came up on the coin. It's basically, I mean, they were playing with a two-headed coin or with a deck of cards that they get all the aces. Either way, they were cheating, and the gig is up. Dr. Thayer, my gig on time is up, and I want to thank you for being with us. Dr. Bradley Thayer, great segment. University of Texas, San Antonio professor, How China Sees the World. This is booked by that. Dr. Thayer, thanks for being with us. We'll probably see you again next week because I don't know who I can get on that's any better understanding the Chinese threat than you are now that we can't get Peter Navarro on every day because he's in the White House negotiating.
John, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, Doc, good job. John Fredericks Radio Network.